Hi folks, marvelous having you here today. We are rather proud and happy that you are sharing approximately 30 minutes with us, sharing contents and insights of HVAC control. My name, Elmar. I'm responsible for technical hotline and training, and I'm speaker today and assisted by my colleague Christoph, assisting me on the monitoring desk. So what is the content of today? HVAC, heating, ventilating and air conditioning. We talk about the applications, we talk about some parameters, we talk about we show up how the operation with the app with a temperature controller can act, and hopefully you will have some good insights in the next couple of minutes. When it comes to, let's say, to the setup, to the projecting, to the designing finally of such prestigious buildings like we do have here, for instance, so we have to consider things like automation in order to save best energy, or the well-being for the people working or living inside, and the maximum of the comfort during, let's say, the lifetime in the office, in the private home, in such kind of buildings we do have, for instance, here. And what has to be considered? It has to be considered as well, so these energy labels like we do have here, so LEED, BREEAM, GBI, Green Building Index, and further on, which cares about the energy efficiency in buildings in regards of light control, air conditioning control, in terms of shading control, in terms of airing control, and furthermore. And this requires solutions, powerful solutions. But don't forget the clients. The clients have desires, have requirements, however, which finally has to be fulfilled. Nevertheless, if we talk about a private client, if we talk about, let's say, a public client in terms of it's a public building, it's a school, or it's an industrial building, however, so they have some desires, some requirements like smooth integration of room temperature controllers in their interior design, so it has to fit. Less is more, so what does it mean? It means the diversity of multiple push buttons, for instance, in a room, so 4 or 5 push buttons, one each below the other, for instance, have to be avoided, so they appreciate one spot, one touch point, and with this touch point you can control almost everything. It reduces nicely, let's say, the technical appearance in the room. And what is required as well? It is required a powerful application, exactly to fulfill these desires, to fulfill these requirements. Less costs in terms of if you have a nice combination like we do have here with the Eon. So you have multiple functions inside. In case of Eon 108, which is displayed here. So we talk about 20 different functions which can be individually set up, plus room temperature controlling, which is really powerful. And by the way, don't forget, so there are some desires as well, so in terms of, for instance, app control, like you see here, So that means not another additional remote which is somewhere on the table. No, your mobile is with you, and with your mobile you have the control, you have the access to do all these remotely. So this is really comfort, I have to say. Eon 108 here with the display with multiple functions. Then we do have here the different, let's say, Eons 102 without any display, twofold, but multiple functions inside. Single push button, double push button, another function, or long-term press, another function, additional function per push button. So really powerful. And as well here, you see directly here, Eon 104. So we do have here exactly push button here, we do have here push button here, and we have as well here LED displays which give you indication what is the current status of something. And when I'm talking about power, a powerful application, what does it mean? So I will show you. So that means we do have here a flower of application, a flower of parameter settings which we can call up. Starting with, let's say, app control, sure. We will see later on in the practical part at the end of this session. We do have here fan stage control, so ideal for professional HVAC systems like we have here in such buildings. So where we have a controlled air conditioning and ventilation, for instance. We do have here the support heating and cooling for those days when it becomes extremely warm or when it becomes really cold. So we do have here multiple functions. It's your choice as a system integrator. It's your choice, the setup. And as well, you have here the option either if you want to have the control command continuous or 2-point. And this relates, or depends what kind of, let's say, heating source you do have. If we talk about a radiator next to the window, or if we do have, for instance, underfloor heating, warm water underfloor heating, for instance, so it differs. And due to that, so you have to choose the right, or you have to need the right application settings, 2-point or continuous control. 2-point mostly for underfloor heating, continuous more for the radiators next to the windows. However, so this is just a rough idea. What about just climate control? And then you discover here on the right-hand side here, percentage value, sequence, scenes, the typical functions, switching, dimming, blinds, and so on, and further on. Values displaying, for instance, all the data points, which you can display on these Eon 108. Alarm function, for instance, you can link if a window is broken, and you get a command, so then the display gives you a feedback with a flashing. So there is something which is not normal. There is something which is, which has to be controlled finally, and as well focused, especially here on the top here. You see here it is LED light control. So HVAC is one part, but LED light control, RGBV, RGBW, for instance, or HCL, all these we can do as well with the Eon 108. In total, 20 functions plus RTR, room temperature control. I think it's really a powerful application. I will give you, I will share some insights. Reduced to these 30 minutes. There is much more to talk about, but it reduced to the minimum. You discover here definitively, you will do have here, for instance, these user-defined options. This is just more for people who have more experience and probably which are forced, finally, to do some adaptations. In buildings where probably the standard settings, which we put in the background, does not fit 100%. So you have to do some adjustments, some fine-tunings. And this you can do if you have adjusted here, for instance, user-defined. If you take this via installation type, if this is activated, you do have the chance to call up just for radiators or for underfloor heatings, and then the default values we, Theben, put in the background as default values with the experience of more than 40 years. And you can believe, you can trust that the values are rather good and they fit mostly, more than 90%. So important thing, but you have to know. Then we do have as well the option, or we have the needs, especially in public buildings, schools, prestigious buildings, offices like we do have here in the background of myself. So we do have here probably the need of the ventilation. So that means we do need here fan stages to control the airing, in a conference room, in a meeting room, or just to care about the well-being of the people working in that building, And then you need fans, fan control, fan stages, for instance. And not to forget, so we do have in all of these Eon controllers. Nevertheless, if we talk about Eon 108, so we have here behind the temperature probe measuring the current room temperature, or as well in the Eon 102, we do have here as well a temperature sensor, and as well in the Eon 104. So, and we can share this room temperature and give it to a heating actuator who acts in this case, or can act in this case, as a heating controller. Just need the external temperature, and then he acts as a controller on its own. Or probably you discover here as well, so we do have here this external activating, or this external value. So that means, for instance, if you want to use this Eon 108 in an industrial area, yeah, where probably we do have pollution, we do have some oil or some dirty things, however, so then probably you will, on long-term run, so you will definitively destroy such kind of controller, because this pollution will get inside the push-button sensor on, and you will have some limitations later on after a couple of years. And if you want to avoid that, so you take just an external probe. The external probe is in the area where you have the pollution, where you have the problem area, however, and the control itself is in your office, in your building, to do the reasonable control on its own. Yeah, so makes sense, I think. And I want to highlight this because it's not usual, not self-explaining. Yeah, and in regards of when we think about, so that these, let's say, room temperature controller in general are used in public buildings, in museums, in offices, however, you know, if there is a touch point and if you can modify some, you know, many people. One is rising, increasing the temperature, the next coming across is reducing, lowering the temperature, however. This is not really efficient, and it's really not good, let's say, for heating control in general. And so with the limitations in the background, so here in this setting here, you can reduce that the maximum set point. For instance, here we do have 21 degrees. And with this limitation here, you can just control up to 23 degrees. So this set point shift is possible. And below 19 degrees in this case, you can't modify the set point. So that's really, you can limit it. And this makes a really room controller efficient, especially in public area. So how you do it, how you decide finally in, let's say, your private flat, your private areas and so on, it's up to you. And your family members, don't forget. Yeah, and when it comes here to these, let's say, fan coil actuators, to support a fan coil actuator, so we have to distinguish two different, let's say, control commands. Either you discover here percentage value, so that means we do have here 0 to 10 volt. Control, so that means a valve can open in 0 to 10 volts, or according to 0 to 10 volt control commands. Or for instance, a fan speed can be controlled between, or with a control command 0 to 10 volts. Yeah, for instance, this fan coil actuator FCA2 from Theben. So the output here is 0 to 10 volt, or how the setting, depends on the setting, can be in stages as well. So what is the difference? What is the advantage? The advantage is finally so that with 0 to 10 volt, you can stepless adjust your desired speed control, especially when we do have, let's say, air exchange systems, tubes, for instance, in such kind of buildings here in the background. So probably at a certain speed, you will have some noises in regards of the airflow. And while a conference, while a meeting, or probably an official announcement from the board, however, to the people, to the staff, it's probably not that comfortable to have this noise. And with these stepless, you can really reduce the fan speed so that we have a really good airflow, but we do not have this disturbance of the noise. And due to that, it could be a big advantage to have this, for instance, in stepless, or for instance, these systems do have dampers, so then you can control, let's say, the dampers. And most of the dampers, meanwhile, have to be controlled with 0 to 10 volt control commands. And this, the FCA2 can do perfectly. Yeah, so what are the options? What are the, let's say, the communication options and the solutions which we can offer? You discover here the Eon 108, powerful. By the way, window status, okay, makes sense. So if you are in a heating process, somebody is opening the window, for instance, so then the heating process stops, avoiding energy wasting, for instance, or vice versa. So when we talk about climate control, that means air conditioning. So then the air conditioning stops while you do a natural airing by open window or so, or balcony door, however. Yeah, and this makes sense. And as well, there are links, there are options to control, for instance, presence with a presence sensor, giving you the trigger. So just in case if somebody is inside of the room, so the Eon, for instance, turns from standby energy saving mode to the comfort mode. that during the meeting, during the announcement of the board, however, we do have really comfortable conditions in the room themselves. Meeting over, after a while, sensor gives a trigger, nobody there anymore, reducing automatically energy efficiency. Yeah, highest energy efficiency. So in this case, so we can link, for instance, Eon 108 with the HMG60, which is initially a heating actuator. So requires a temperature controller to send the heating value, for instance. But our actuators as well can do both. So that means either you can use each channel as a heating actuator, or you can choose you have or you want to control a channel, a heating channel, as a heating controller. So what is required? You need just a temperature probe. Yeah, you need just a room temperature. And then one of these channels, or all channels for instance, can support the reasonable, let's say, control commands for the rooms. So highly flexible. If you discover here this highest activating value, so the second from the button, so what does it mean? So depends on the value, the heating value, for instance, this highest value of the entire actuator is sent to a heating gateway, for instance, and the heating gateway can adjust the heating curve according to the demands. Just powerful actuators can do that. Yeah, or you can do some, let's say, small fancy hidden heating control with our flush mounted actuators. We do have here, for instance, these flush mounted actuators, super flat, fits ideal in such kind of flush boxes we do have here. We do have here binary inputs, and the input E2 you can link with such kind of temperature probe. Tiny, fancy, little, small, you discover here, and this you link here directly to this actuator, and you do have a discrete, nicely and invisible temperature control, for instance, in your living room. So that means you put it in a flush box, you put a cover upon the rear side, you stick this temperature probe, the temperature probe is linked to the binary input, and the temperature controller is ready for go. So that means you do not discover him, because from the surface of this cover here, we tap the room temperature. And from the outside, invisible. Can do that, yeah? It's up to you. Or we can do it in such a way, we link it, so that means the Eon, in this case, set to heating and cooling control, plus ventilation support, and this is the point what we talk about now. This is the most, let's say, powerful application we can support. Ideal schools, hotels, offices, public buildings, some, let's say, specific stocking areas, however, where we have for foodstuff, for instance, where we have to climatize really carefully. Yeah, and this is the ideal couple, let's say. And you have listened carefully, I assume. So we support, in this case, fan coil systems or air conditioning systems. Here is just a scheme. So we do have here filter systems to filter out the pollutions. We do have here a fan blowing the warm air or the cold air in, depends on which status we do have currently. And with valves, for instance, we open this source of heating or of cooling. And here again, we control the fan speed, depends on, for instance, CO2 value we do have here inside of the room. So if we have to force, we have to start the air exchange. In nowadays, really highly important. Yeah, come back on this a few bit later. So that means we have two options in the fan coil, heating, cooling, ventilation, but we do have just one powerful controller, and this powerful controller supports you in any case. Heating, cooling, ventilation, displaying values, and further other 20 application functions. Dead zone is highly recommended between heating and cooling. Otherwise, two systems, heating and cooling, are working against each other. So there is a minimum of 2 degrees we recommend between these two stages, these two set points. And stages, okay, 3 stages, depends always on the fan. If the fan can support you with 0 to 10 volt or following the 0 to 10 volt commands, always the 0 to 10 volt is to be preferred, sure. But if the motor, for instance, in this damper or the motor in the fan just follows according to 1, 2, 3 steps, for instance, then we have to recommend to take FCA1. We just can't do that. FCA2 can both, either or, stage or 0 to 10 volt. And Eon is perfectly supporting him. How it looks like in practice, it is a 4-pipe system, which is common. Meanwhile, 2-pipe is more in elderly buildings. 4-pipe is standard. So flow forward, hot water, flow backward, return to the system, hot water, or flow forward cooling and flow back the heating. And with the valves 0 to 10 volt or I/O, you can control each room totally separately. Yeah, it looks in the practice like that. Probably you have a certain outlet and a ceiling. Looks like that. And here you have the control unit which have been applied to the FCA2. And the FCA2 receives the control command from the Eon. What is needed, what is required? I tried to simplify it in such a way. You need from the Eon just the actuating value heating. You need an actuating value cooling, yeah, and you have to link it finally to the FCA2. That's it, and the system is almost running, yeah, with a little effort of programming. When it comes to, let's say, the ventilation, in this case I set, for instance, ventilation as a value. So then you have just to link these two communication objects. You need just this fan speed or the fan forced mode. This is highly recommended, especially when, for instance, you do have a meeting or such. Yeah. And you know, if you have a gathering in the room and there are a lot of people inside, so then the CO2 value is rising, yeah, increasing tremendously. After half an hour, easily, you will have values which are definitively above the desired values, let's say it this way. Yeah. So that means we need this airing, but probably during the conference, it is not that comfortable that you have these noisy wind streams or probably an audible noise from the fan. And so you can lock or unlock more or less. And you can do as well manual override the fan speed, the different fan speeds, which you can, let's say, call up. Window contact integrated, sure, it's mandatory, I have to say. And this is what does make sense. And when we come to a ventilation always required. If we talk about this, for instance, Theben hotel, or if we talk about this government office here, for instance, you need a ventilation, especially these times. Yeah, we do have the problem, you know, these COVID things and so on. We need, let's say, a good air recovery, air renewing. Yeah. And this, for instance, we use a CO2 sensor. CO2 sensor is measuring, giving us the control command. How is the air quality inside? And according to that, we can start and we can act on the fan speed, the stages or the degree of the value, for instance, how fast, how much air we have to renew, for instance, because the CO2 value is rather high. And as well, you discover here, so many investigations all around the world of medical scientists discovered that, let's say, a humidity of approximately 40 to 60% and the temperature above 30 degrees is good against these kinds of, the spreading of these kinds of viruses. For instance, this is confirmed from different sources, and due to that, this airing gets a totally different, let's say, value, a totally different focus in the climatization of a building. And with the CO2 sensor and the Eon, for instance, we can control this airing as well really perfectly. Displaying these values coming from the CO2 sensor, displaying in the Eon, and by the way, the Eon allows you, for instance, to control heating and cooling, and you can, in totally, with the Eon, you can control as well the fan speeds or log for the meeting, for instance, what is ongoing. Just to share some values we do have here, so that you can have a feeling for, so what does it mean, parts per million, this CO2 value. So between, let's say, breathing, exhaling or breathing. So if I hoover in fresh air, it's about 400 ppm, so fresh air from the outside or from outdoor. If I exhale, so it depends on, let's say, my lung size, for instance, how strong my body work finally is, can be between 10,000 and 40,000 ppm per person. Yeah, and you can imagine now easily. So if you have a gathering in the room, just 5 to 10 people, so that the CO2 value is increasing rather fast, and the air exchange is required. And 100,000 ppm, for instance, is a candle is self-extinguishing, so it's a kind of a pre-warning, and afterwards, okay. Tja, either highway to hell or stairway to heaven. I don't know how your lifestyle was finally. So back coming to the Eon itself, and time is elapsing more or less. So I have to care, or I want to care a little bit about, let's say, these app controls. So what is the understanding? What is the application? What is the need? What I have to do finally? You have to do finally nothing. You have just to program the Eon with the required communication commands for the heating, for the cooling, for the ventilation. It has to run, sure. And then you have to do the following. You have to download, for instance, from Google Play or from the Apple App Store, the Eon app, Theben Eon app. It's for free. And you have just to synchronize via Bluetooth with the Eon 108, and the deal is done. And you have your visualization, your remote control for your room. Just one room? No. If you have multiple rooms with multiple Eons 108, so you can link and log in anytime. And this part I will show you at the end of this session in a practical part. So due to that, I need two things. I need the screen exactly from my mobile, and we need a small demonstration, which we do have here. And I try to link in now. I open my app. Here is the Eon app. So, and I start now the search. So discovered. Here in this presentation, there are discovered two of them. So, and I select, for instance, this one, and I link it. So, and I open it. And now you have the discovery that the controller here is giving you a Bluetooth pin code. In my case, it is 4700. Okay. And then automatically, I do have mirrored the function from this nice room temperature controller directly on your app. And you can open, for instance, the app, can modify, for instance, the fan control, can modify, in this case, in this small example, the modes, different mode from comfort to standby and so on. And for instance, you can as well modify here, let's say the set point temperature, whatever you like, remotely, if you have programmed some further functions, for instance here. So then you get listed later on here, it takes a second, the CO2 values, for instance, humidity or whatever. So all these functions integrated here, you will get mirrored exactly here on your mobile touch point of the Eon's surface itself. You discover here, you have here, we have talked about just HVAC, but there are plenty other options which we can support with Eon 108. Be excited. Watch our service page from time to time. We are giving webinars, and if you have missed one webinar, so there are some recordings. If you have further questions to us, let's keep in touch. Thanks for sharing time. Bye.